ಬಾಪೂಜಿ ವಿದ್ಯಾಸಂಸ್ಥೆ ಅನ್ನೋಕ್ಕಿಂತಲೂ ದಾವಣಗೆರೆನ ಶಿವಶಂಕರಪ್ಪರವರ ಶಿಕ್ಷಣ ಸಂಸ್ಥೆ ಅನ್ನುವಷ್ಟು ಪಾಪ್ಯುಲರ್ ಆಗಿದ್ದರು. ಇವತ್ತು ಅವರ ಸಂಸ್ಥೆಗಳ ಮುಖಾಂತರ ವೈದ್ಯರು ಇರ್ಬೋದು, ಇಂಜಿನಿಯರ್ ಇರ್ಬೋದು, ಬೇರೆ ಬೇರೆ ಪದವಿ ಲಕ್ಷಾವಧಿ ಜನರು ಇವತ್ತು ಪದವಿಯನ್ನು ಪಡ್ಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಅಷ್ಟು ಜನರಿಗೆ ಅನುಕೂಲ ಮಾಡಿಕೊಡ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಅವರು ಸಹಾಯವನ್ನು ಮಾಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ ಅನ್ನುವಂಥ ಮಾತನ್ನು ಹೇಳಿ 13ರಿಂದ 18ರೊಳಗೆ ಸನ್ಮಾನ್ಯ ಸಿದ್ದರಾಮಯ್ಯ ಸಾಹೇಬರ ಸರ್ಕಾರದಲ್ಲಿ ತೋಟಗಾರಿಕೆ ಮಂತ್ರಿಯಾಗಿದ್ದರು. ನಮ್ಮದು ಬಾಗಲಕೋಟೆ ಜಿಲ್ಲೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ತೋಟಗಾರಿಕೆ ವಿಶ್ವವಿದ್ಯಾಲಯ ಇದೆ. ಬಾಗಲಕೋಟೆಗೆ ಬರೋಕ್ಕಿಂತಲೂ ಮುಂಚಿತವಾಗಿ ನಮಗೆ ಮಾಹಿತಿ ಬರ್ತಿತ್ತು, ನಾನು ಬರ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ ಇರಬೇಕಂತ ತಿಳ್ಕೊಂಡು. ಎಷ್ಟು ದಿವಸ ಇರ್ತಿದ್ರು ಅಷ್ಟು ದಿವಸ ನಮ್ಮನ್ನು ಕರಿಲಾರ್ದ ಊಟ ಮಾಡ್ತಿದ್ರು, ನಮ್ಮನ್ನು ಕರ್ಕೊಂಡು ಊಟ ಮಾಡ್ತಿದ್ರು. ಸಾಕಷ್ಟು ವಯಸ್ಸಿನ ಅಂತರ ಇದ್ದರೂ ಸಹಿತ ಅವರಲ್ಲಿ ನಾನು ಹಿರಿಯವ ನೀವು ಚಿಕ್ಕವರು ಅನ್ನುವಂಥ ಭೇದ ಭಾವ ಇದ್ದಿದ್ದಿಲ್ಲ. ಜೊತೆಗೆ ಇದಕ್ಕಿಂತ ಹೆಚ್ಚು ನಾನು ಹೇಳ್ಬೇಕಂದ್ರೆ ನಾನು 13ನೇ ಚುನಾವಣೆ ಮತ್ತು 23ರ ಚುನಾವಣೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ನನ್ನ ಸಹಾಯಕ್ಕೆ ಬಂದವರು ಅನ್ನುವಂಥ ಮಾತನ್ನು ನೆನಪಿಸ್ಕೊಳ್ಬೇಕಾಗ್ತದೆ. ನಾನು ಅವರು ಆಸ್ಪತ್ರೆಗೂ ಹೋಗಿದ್ದೆ ನಾನು ಭೇಟಿಯಾಗಲಿಕ್ಕೆ. ಒಮ್ಮೆ ದಾವಣಗೆರೆ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಮನೆಗೆ ಹೋದಾಗ ಅವರು ನನ್ನ ಗೋಣ್ ಎತ್ತಿ ನೋಡಿದವ್ರ ಯಾವ ಬಂದಪ್ಪ ಜೇಟಿ ಅಂತ ಕೇಳಿದರು. ಬಂದು ಅವ್ರ ಮನೆಯವ್ರಿಗೆ ಹೇಳಿದರು, ಇವ್ರಿಗೆ ಊಟ ಮಾಡಿಸಲಾರ್ದ ಕಳಿಸ್ಬೇಡ್ರಿ ಅಂತ ತಾಕೀತು ಮಾಡಿದರು. ಅಷ್ಟು ಆತಿಥ್ಯವನ್ನು ಅವರು ಪ್ರತಿಯೊಂದು ಯಾವುದೇ ವ್ಯಕ್ತಿ ಸಣ್ಣವಿರಲಿ ದೊಡ್ಡವಿರಲಿ ವಯಸ್ಸಿನ ಅಂತರ ಇರಲಾರ್ದೇ ಗೌರವ ಕೊಡುವಂಥ ಸ್ವಭಾವ ಆಗಿತ್ತು. ಅಂಥವ್ರು ಇವತ್ತು ನಮ್ಮ ನಗಲಿದ್ದು ಭಾಳ ದುಃಖ ತಂದಿದ್ದು. ನನಗಂತೂ ವೈಯಕ್ತಿಕ ಕುಟುಂಬದಲ್ಲಿ ಒಬ್ಬ ಸದಸ್ಯನನ್ನು ಕಳೆದುಕೊಂಡ ದುಃಖ ಆಗಿದೆ ಅನ್ನುವಂಥ ಮಾತನ್ನೇ ಅವರಿಗೆ ಚಿರಶಾಂತಿ ಸಿಗಲಿ, ಅವರ ಕುಟುಂಬದವರಿಗೆ ದೇವರು ಹೆಚ್ಚಿನ ಶಕ್ತಿಯನ್ನು ಅದನ್ನು ಕೊಡಲಿ ಅಂತ ತಿಳ್ಕೊಂಡು ಭಗವಂತನಲ್ಲಿ ಪ್ರಾರ್ಥಿಸಿ ಎರಡು ಮಾತು ಮುಗಿಸ್ತೇನೆ.
ಮಾನ್ಯ ಸಭಾಧ್ಯಕ್ಷೆ, ಸಂತಾಪ ಸೂಚನೆಗೆ ಬೆಂಬಲವನ್ನು ವ್ಯಕ್ತಪಡಿಸುತ್ತಾ ಮಾನ್ಯ ಶಾಮನೂರು ಶಿವಶಂಕರಪ್ಪರವರು ಹಿರಿಯ ರಾಜಕಾರಣಿ, ಸಜ್ಜನ ರಾಜಕಾರಣಿ, ಒಂದು ರೀತಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಯುವ ಶಾಸಕರಿಗೆ ಮಾದರಿ ಅಂತೇಳಿದ್ರು ಕೂಡ ತಪ್ಪಾಗಲಾರ್ದು. ಶಾಮನೂರು ಶಿವಶಂಕರಪ್ಪನವರು ಒಂದು ರೀತಿ ದಾವಣಗೆರೆ ಅಂತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಜಿಲ್ಲೆಯನ್ನು ಅಂತಾರಾಷ್ಟ್ರೀಯ ಮಟ್ಟದಲ್ಲಿ ಗುರುತಿಸಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಒಂದು ರೀತಿ ಕಾರಣಕರ್ತರು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರು ಕೂಡ ತಪ್ಪಾಗಲಾರ್ದು. ಏಕೆಂದರೆ ಅವರು ಮಾಡಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಸೇವೆ ಅದು ಧಾರ್ಮಿಕ ಕ್ಷೇತ್ರ ಇರ್ಬೋದು, ಆರೋಗ್ಯ ಕ್ಷೇತ್ರದಲ್ಲಿರ್ಬೋದು, ಸಾಮಾಜಿಕ ಕ್ಷೇತ್ರದಲ್ಲಿರ್ಬೋದು, ಎಲ್ಲ ಕ್ಷೇತ್ರದಲ್ಲೂ ಕೂಡ ಅವ್ರದ್ದೇ ಆದಂಥ ಸೇವೆಯನ್ನು ಕೊಟ್ಟೋಗಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥದ್ದು ನಾವೆಲ್ಲರೂ ಕೂಡ ಒಂದು ರೀತಿ ನಮ್ಮೆಲ್ಲರೂ ಕೂಡ ಮಾದರಿ ಅಂತೇಳಿ ಈ ಸಂದರ್ಭದಲ್ಲಿ ಹೇಳಬೇಕಾಗತ್ತೆ. ನಾನು ಅವ್ರನ್ನ ಮೊದಲು ಪ್ರತ್ಯಕ್ಷವಾಗಿ ನೋಡ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಅವಕಾಶ ಈ ವಿಧಾನಸಭೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಓಡ್ ತಗೊಳ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಸಂದರ್ಭದಲ್ಲಿ ಅವ್ರನ್ನ ನೋಡಿದೆ. ಅದಾದ ನಂತರದಲ್ಲಿ ನನ್ನ ಆತ್ಮೀಯ ಸ್ನೇಹಿತರು ನಮ್ಮ BJP ಜಿಲ್ಲಾಧ್ಯಕ್ಷರಾದಂಥ ಸಿದ್ದೇಶ್ ನಾಗೇಂದ್ರ ಅವ್ರ ಜೊತೆ ಅವ್ರ ಮನೆಗೆ ಹೋಗಿ ಅವ್ರನ್ನ ಭೇಟಿ ಮಾಡ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಅವಕಾಶ ಕೂಡ ಸಿಕ್ತು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರು ಕೂಡ ತಪ್ಪಾಗಲಾರ್ದು. ಈ ರೀತಿ ರಾಜಕಾರಣಿಗಳು ಒಂದು ರೀತಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ನಮ್ಮ ಯುವಕರಿಗೆ ಸ್ಫೂರ್ತಿ ಅಂತೇಳಿ ಈ ಸಂದರ್ಭದಲ್ಲಿ ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಅವ್ರದ್ದೇ ಆದಂಥ ಸೇವೆಯನ್ನು ಈ ರಾಜ್ಯಕ್ಕೆ ಈ ಜಿಲ್ಲೆಗೆ ಕೊಟ್ಟೋಗಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥದ್ದು ನಾವೆಲ್ಲರೂ ಕೂಡ ಸ್ಮರಿಸ್ಕೋಬೇಕಾಗತ್ತೆ. ಖಂಡಿತವಾಗ್ಲೂ ಕೂಡ ಆ ಭಗವಂತ ಅವರ ಕುಟುಂಬಕ್ಕೆ ಆ ದುಃಖವನ್ನು ಭರಿಸ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಶಕ್ತಿಯನ್ನು ಕೊಡಲಿ ಅಂಥೇಳಿ ಆ ಭಗವಂತನಲ್ಲಿ ಪ್ರಾರ್ಥನೆಯನ್ನು ಮಾಡಿ ನನಗೆ ಅವಕಾಶಕ್ಕೆ ಧನ್ಯವಾದವನ್ನು ಹೇಳ್ತೀನಿ. ಸಭಾಧ್ಯಕ್ಷೆ
ಮಾನ್ಯ ಅಧ್ಯಕ್ಷರೇ, ತಾವು ತಂದಂಥ ಸಂತಾಪ ಸೂಚಕ ನಿರ್ಣಯಕ್ಕೆ ಬೆಂಬಲಿಸಿ ಶಾಮನೂರು ಶಿವಶಂಕರಪ್ಪನವ್ರ ಹತ್ರ ಅನೇಕ ಸಾರಿ ನಾನು ಹೋಗಿದ್ದೀನಿ. ನನ್ನ ಸ್ನೇಹಿತರೊಬ್ಬರ ಮಗಳಿಗೆ ಅವರ ಡೆಂಟಲ್ ಕಾಲೇಜ್ನಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದು ಕೆಲಸ ಕೊಡಿಸ್ಬೇಕಾಗಿತ್ತು. ನನಗೆ ಒತ್ತಡ ಹಾಕಿದ್ರು. ನಾನು ಹೇಳಿದೆ ಅವರೆಲ್ಲ ಎಲ್ಲಿ ಕೊಡ್ತಾರೆ, ನಾವೆಲ್ಲ ಮಾತಾಡಿದ್ರೆ ಅಂತ. ಒಂದು ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಅವ್ರು ಭಾಳ ದೊಡ್ಡವರು ಅನ್ನೋ ರೀತಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ನಾನು ಕರ್ಕೊಂಡು ಹೋದೆ. ಒತ್ತಡ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರು, ಕರ್ಕೊಂಡು ಹೋದರೆ. ಆದರೆ ಅವರು ಪ್ರೀತಿ ಮಾಡಿ ನನ್ನನ್ನು ಕೂರಿಸಿ ಅವರ ಡೈರೆಕ್ಟರ್ ಒಬ್ಬರಿಗೆ ಫೋನ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರು, ನೋಡಪ್ಪ ಜ್ಞಾನೇಂದ್ರ ಕರ್ಕೊಂಡು ಬಂದಿದ್ದಾನೆ, ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ಕೆಲಸ ಕೊಡಬೇಕು ಅಂತೇಳಿ ಹೇಳಿಬಿಟ್ರು. ಹೀಗೆ ಅತ್ಯಂತ ಸರಳ ಸಜ್ಜನಿಕೆಯ ನಮ್ಮನ್ನೆಲ್ಲ ಪ್ರೀತಿಯಿಂದ ಕಾಣುವಂಥ ವ್ಯಕ್ತಿತ್ವ. ಹೆಚ್ಚು ಭಾಷಣ ಮಾಡಿದವರಲ್ಲ ರಾಜಕಾರಣಿಯಾಗಿ, ಆದರೆ ಹೆಚ್ಚು ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡಿದಂಥವ್ರು. ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ತಾನು ಓದಿದ್ದು ಕಡಿಮೆ, ಯಾವುದೋ ಮೀಡಿಯಾದಲ್ಲಿ ನೋಡಿದೆ LSA ಓದಿದ್ದವರು. ಆದರೆ ತಾನು ಕಟ್ಟಿದಂಥ ಶಿಕ್ಷಣ ಸಂಸ್ಥೆಗಳಿಂದ ಇತರೆಯವರ ಮಕ್ಕಳಿಗೆ ಕೊಟ್ಟಂಥ ಶಿಕ್ಷಣ ಭಾಳ ಉನ್ನತವಾದಂಥ ಶಿಕ್ಷಣ. ಸಾವಿರಾರು ಜನರಿಗೆ ಬದುಕನ್ನು ಕಟ್ಟಿಕೊಟ್ಟಂಥವ್ರವರು. ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ಅವರ ಬದುಕು ನಾವೆಲ್ಲರೂ ಕೂಡ ನೆನಪಿಡುವಂಥದ್ದು, ಇಡೀ ಕರ್ನಾಟಕ ರಾಜ್ಯ ನೆನಪಿಡುವಂಥದ್ದು. ಮತ್ತು ಮಧ್ಯ ಕರ್ನಾಟಕದ ಕೇಂದ್ರ ಬಿಂದುವಾದಂಥ ದಾವಣಗೆರೆಗೆ ಭಾಳ ದೊಡ್ಡ ಕೀರ್ತಿಪ್ರಾಯರಾಗಿದ್ದಂಥ ಶಾಮನೂರವರ ನಿಧನ ನಮ್ಮೆಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ಕೂಡ ದುಃಖವನ್ನು ಕೊಟ್ಟಿದೆ. ಅವರ ಕುಟುಂಬದ ವರ್ಗದವರಿಗೆ, ಅಭಿಮಾನಿಗಳಿಗೆ. ಆ ದುಃಖವನ್ನು ಸಹಿಸುವಂಥ ಶಕ್ತಿಯನ್ನು ಕೊಡಲಿ ಅಂತೇಳಿ ಹಾರೈಸಿ ನಾನು ಮಾತನ್ನು ಮುಗಿಸ್ತೇನೆ.
ಎನ್ ಟಿ ಶ್ರೀನಿವಾಸ್.
ಸನ್ಮಾನ್ಯ ಅಧ್ಯಕ್ಷರೇ, ತಾವು ತಂದಿರುವ ಸಂತಾಪ ಸೂಚನೆಗೆ ಬೆಂಬಲ ವ್ಯಕ್ತಪಡಿಸುತ್ತಾ ದಿವಂಗತ ಶಾಮನೂರು ಶಿವಶಂಕರಪ್ಪನವರು ಅತ್ಯಂತ ಹಿರಿಯ ರಾಜಕಾರಣಿ. ಮತ್ತು ಇವರ ಒಂದೇ ವರ್ಡಲ್ಲಿ ಹೇಳಬೇಕಂದ್ರೆ ಶರಣರ ಗುಣ ಮರಣದಲ್ಲಿ ಕಾಣು ಎಂಬಂತೆ ಬದುಕನ್ನು ಸವಿಸುವುದಕ್ಕಿಂತ ಬದುಕನ್ನು ಸಾರ್ಥಕಗೊಳಿಸುವುದು ಧರ್ಮದ ಸಾರ. ಇಷ್ಟಲಿಂಗ ಪೂಜೆ, ಸ್ಥಾವರ ಜಂಗಮದ ಸೇವೆ ಮತ್ತು ದಾಸೋ ತತ್ವವನ್ನೇ ಉಸಿರಾಗಿಸಿಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದ ಮಹಾಚೇತನವೊಂದು ಇವತ್ತು ಶಿವನ ಪಾದದಲ್ಲಿ ಲೀನವಾಗಿದೆ. ಸನ್ಮಾನ್ಯ ಅಧ್ಯಕ್ಷರೇ, ಇವರಂಥ ಸರಳ ಸಜ್ಜನೆ ರಾಜಕಾರಣಿ. ಇವರು ನಮ್ಮ ತಂದೆಯವರಿಗೆ ಭಾಳ ಆಪ್ತರಾಗಿದ್ದರು. ನಮ್ಮ ತಂದೆಯವರಿಗೆ ರಾಜಕೀಯವಾಗಿ ತುಂಬ ಕೂಡ ಸಹಾಯ ಕೂಡ ಮಾಡಿದರು ದಿವಂಗತ ಎನ್ ಟಿ ಬೊಮ್ಮಣ್ಣನವರಿಗೆ. ಮತ್ತು ನಾನು ಇವ್ರಿಗೆ ನೆನೆಸ್ಕೊಳ್ತಾ ಇರೋದು ಇವತ್ತು ವೈದ್ಯಕೀಯ ಕ್ಷೇತ್ರಕ್ಕೆ ಇವರು ಕೊಟ್ಟಂಥ ಕೊಡುಗೆ ವಿಚಾರವಾಗಿ. ಇವತ್ತು ಯೂಶಲಿ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ಸ್ ಆದರೆ ಅವರು ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ಗಳಾಗ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಇನ್ಸ್ಟಿಟ್ಯೂಟ್ಸು ಕಟ್ಟಿಸ್ತಾರೆ. ಆದರೆ ಇವರೊಬ್ಬರು ಸಾಮಾನ್ಯ ವ್ಯಕ್ತಿಯಾಗಿ ಒಂದು ಸಾಮಾನ್ಯ ಕುಟುಂಬದಿಂದ ಬಂದು ಇವತ್ತು ವೈದ್ಯಕೀಯ ಕ್ಷೇತ್ರಕ್ಕೆ ಇಡೀ ರಾಜ್ಯಕ್ಕಲ್ಲ, ದೇಶಕ್ಕಲ್ಲ, ಪ್ರಪಂಚದಲ್ಲಿ ಇವತ್ತು ಯಾವುದಾದ್ರೂ ಎಲ್ಲ ಸ್ಪೆಷಾಲಿಟೀಸಲ್ಲಿ ಏನಾದರೂ ಬೆಸ್ಟ್ ಆಫ್ ದ ಬೆಸ್ಟ್ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ಸ್ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ ಅಂದರೆ ಅದೇ ಜೆ ಮೆಡಿಕಲ್ ಕಾಲೇಜಿಂದ ದಾವಣಗೆರೆಯಿಂದ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಇಡೀ ನನ್ನ ಫ್ರೆಂಡ್ಸ್ ಯಾವ ಪ್ರಪಂಚದ ಮೂಲೆಯಲ್ಲಾದರೂ ನೋಡ್ರೂ ಒಂದು ಜೆ ಒಂದು ಕಾಲೇಜಿಂದ ಒಂದು ಅಲ್ಲಿ ವೈದ್ಯಕೀಯ ವಿದ್ಯಾರ್ಥಿಗಳು ವೈದ್ಯಕೀಯ ಕ್ಷೇತ್ರದಲ್ಲಿ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಇಂಥ ಒಂದು ಮಹಾನ್ ಕೊಡುಗೆ ಕೊಟ್ಟಂಥ ಇವತ್ತು ನಮ್ಮೆಲ್ಲರ ಹಿರಿಯ ರಾಜಕಾರಣಿ ಇವತ್ತು ನಮ್ಮನ್ನೇ ಅಗಲಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ವೈದ್ಯಕೀಯ ಕ್ಷೇತ್ರಕ್ಕೆ ಕೊಟ್ಟ ಅಪಾರ ಕೊಡುಗೆಗೆ ಇವತ್ತು ಅವ್ರನ್ನ ಸ್ಮರಿಸಿ ಮತ್ತು ತಾವು ತಂದಿರುವ ಬೆಂಬಲ ಇದಕ್ಕೆ ಬೆಂಬಲ ವ್ಯಕ್ತಪಡಿಸುತ್ತಾ ಮತ್ತು ಅವರ ಆತ್ಮಕ್ಕೆ ಚಿರಶಾಂತಿ ಸಿಗಲಿ ಮತ್ತು ಆ ಕುಟುಂಬದ ವರ್ಗದವರಿಗೆ ಮತ್ತು ಎಲ್ಲ ಕುಟುಂಬಸ್ಥರಿಗೆ ಮತ್ತು ಬೆಂಬಲಿಗರಿಗೆ ಆ ಒಂದು ತಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋಂಥ ಶಕ್ತಿ ಆ ದೇವ್ರು ನೀಡಲಿ ಅಂತೇಳಿ ನಾನು ಮಾತು ಮುಗಿಸ್ತೀನಿ.
ಸನ್ಮಾನ್ಯ ಅಧ್ಯಕ್ಷೆ, ತಾವು ತಂದಿರೋ ಸಂತಾಪ ಸೂಚನೆಗೆ ಬೆಂಬಲವನ್ನು ಘೋಷಣೆ ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ. ಶಾಮನೂರು ಶೇಖರಪ್ಪ ಅವರು ನನಗೂ ಭಾಳ ಆತ್ಮೀಯರಾಗಿದ್ದರು. ಒಂದು ವರ್ಷ ಹಿಂದೆಯೇ ಅವರು ಆ್ಯಕ್ಟಿವ್ ಆಗಿ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡ್ತಾಯಿದ್ರು. ಅವ್ರು ಅನಿಸ್ತಾ ಇರಲಿಲ್ಲ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ 94 ವಯಸ್ಸಂತ. ಕ್ಷೇತ್ರದ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಭಾಳ ಕಾಲೇಜನ್ನು ಹಮ್ಮಿಕೊಂಡಿದ್ರು. ಭಾಳ ಸತಿ ನಂತವ ನಾನು ಕ್ವಾರ್ಟರ್ಸ್ ಇದ್ದರೆ ಕ್ವಾರ್ಟರ್ಸ್ ಬರೋದು, ಆಫೀಸಲ್ಲಿದ್ದರೆ ಆಫೀಸ್ ಬರೋದು, ಇಲ್ಲ ಯಾವುದನ್ನ ಮೀಟಿಂಗ್ ಇದ್ದರೂ ಮೀಟಿಂಗಲ್ಲಿ ಬಂದುಬಿಟ್ಟು ಅವ್ರ ಕ್ಷೇತ್ರಕ್ಕೆ ಸಂಬಂಧಪಟ್ಟಂಗೆ, ಬರೀ ಕ್ಷೇತ್ರಕ್ಕಿಲ್ಲ ದಾವಣಗೆರೆ ಜಿಲ್ಲೆ ಸಂಬಂಧಪಟ್ಟಂಗೆ ಪಾಪ ಕೆಲಸಗಳು ತೊಗೊಂಡ್ಬರ್ತಾಯಿದ್ರು. ನಾನು ಹೇಳಿದ್ದೆ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ, ಸರ್ ಬೇಡ ಸರ್, ನೀವು ದಯಮಾಡಿ ಬರೋದು ಬೇಡ, ನೀವು ಫೋನ್ ಮಾಡಿ ನಾನು ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡಿಕೊಡ್ತೀನಿ ಅಂದರೆ, ಇಲ್ಲಪ್ಪ ನನ್ನ ಕ್ಷೇತ್ರ ನಾನು ಗಟ್ಟಿಯಾಗಿದ್ದೀನಿ, ಇನ್ನೂ ಗಟ್ಟಿಯಾಗಿದ್ದೀನಿ, ನನಗೇನಾಗಿದೆ, ನಾನು ಇನ್ನೂ ಗಟ್ಟಿಯಾಗಿ ಬರೋ ಚುನಾವಣೆಯಿಂದ ಎಲೆಕ್ಷನಲ್ಲೂ ನಾನು ಕಂಟೆಸ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀನಿ ಅಂತ ಆ ಭರವಸೆನ ವಿಶ್ವಾಸನ ಹಮ್ಮಿಕೊಂಡಿದ್ರು. ಅವರು ನನ್ನನ್ನು ಸಿಕ್ಕಿ ಅವರು 50 ವರ್ಷ ರಾಜಕೀಯ ಹಿನ್ನೆಲೆಯಲ್ಲಿ 1969 ಮುನ್ಸಿಪಾಲ್ಟಿ ಮೆಂಬರ್ ಆಗಿದ್ದರು. ಆಮೇಲೆ ಮುನ್ಸಿಪಾಲ್ಟಿ ಅಧ್ಯಕ್ಷ ಆಗಿಬಿಟ್ಟು 5 ಬಾರಿ MLA ಆಗಿಬಿಟ್ಟು 1 ಬಾರಿ MP ಆಗಿಬಿಟ್ಟು ಮಂತ್ರಿಯಾಗಿ ಸೇವೆನ ಸಲ್ಲಿಸಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಅವರಿಗೆ ಒಂದು ವಿಶ್ವಾಸ ಇತ್ತು. ನನಗೆ ತಮಾಷೆ ಮಾಡ್ತಾಯಿದ್ದೆ, ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಮಾತಾಡುವಾಗ ತಮಾಷೆ ಮಾಡ್ತಾಯಿದ್ದೆ, ಸರ್ ನಿಮ್ಮ ಮಗ ಮಂತ್ರಿ ಆಗಿದ್ದಾನೆ, ತಾವು ಆಗ್ತೀರಾ ಸರ್ ಅಂದರೆ, ನಾನು ಈಗಲೂ ರೆಡಿ ಕಣಪ್ಪ, ಹೇಳಪ್ಪ ಸಿದ್ದರಾಮಯ್ಯ ಸಾಹೇಬ್ರಿಗೆ ನಾನು ಮಂತ್ರಿ ಆಗೋಕ್ಕೆ ಸಿದ್ಧ ಅಂತ. ಅಂದರೆ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಅನಿಸ್ತಾ ಇಲ್ಲ. ನನ್ನ ತಮ್ಮ ಮೈಂಡ್ಸೆಟ್ ಅಂತಾರೆ, ಏಜಿಗೆ ಏನಾಗಿದೆ ಮೈಂಡ್ಸೆಟ್, ಯೋಚನೆ ಮೈಂಡ್ಸೆಟ್ ಏನು ನಾವು ಅಂದ್ಕೊಳ್ತೀವಿ ಅದು ಆಗ್ತದೆ. ಅಂದರೆ ಅವ್ರ ಮೈಂಡ್ಸೆಟ್ ಹೆಂಗಿದ್ದೆ ಅಂದರೆ, ನಾನು ಇನ್ನೂ ಒಂದು 20-30 ವರ್ಷ ಹುಡುಗ ಅಂತ ಅನಿಸ್ತಾಯಿದ್ರು ಅವರು. ಅಷ್ಟು ಗಟ್ಟಿಯಾಗಿದ್ದರು. ನಾವು ಯಾರೂ ನಿರೀಕ್ಷೆ ಮಾಡಿಲ್ಲ ಅವ್ರ ಗಟ್ಟಿಪನಕ್ಕೆ, ನಾವು ಯಾರೂ ನಿರೀಕ್ಷೆ ಮಾಡಿಲ್ಲ ಅಷ್ಟು ಬೇಗ ಅವ್ರು ಬಿಟ್ಟೋಗ್ತಾರಂತ. ಇಷ್ಟೇ ಭಗವಂತಂತರ ಅವ್ರ ಆತ್ಮಕ್ಕೆ ಶಾಂತಿ ಸಿಕ್ಕಲಿ, ಅವ್ರ ಕುಟುಂಬಕ್ಕೆ ಇದು ಸಹಿಸ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋ ಶಕ್ತಿ ಕೊಡಲಿ ಅಂತ ಭಗವಂತಂತ ಪ್ರಾರ್ಥನೆ ಮಾಡ್ತೀನಿ.
ಈಗ ಮರ್ತ ಗೌರವಾರ್ಥ 1 ನಿಮಿಷ ಮೌನ ಆಚರಿಸ್ಬೇಕಂತ ಕೋರ್ತೇನೆ. ಈ ಸದನವು ಅಂಗೀಕರಿಸಿದ ಸಂತಾಪ ಸೂಚನಾ ನಿರ್ಣಯದ ಪ್ರತಿಯನ್ನು ಮೃತರ ಕುಟುಂಬಕ್ಕೆ ಕಳಿಸಲಾಗುವುದು. ಈಗ ಸದನವನ್ನು ನಾಳೆ ಬೆಳಿಗ್ಗೆ 9:30 ಪ್ರಾರಂಭಿಸಲಾಗುವುದು.
Slim like a whisper, sharp in the hand, never unplanned.
Introducing Motorola Edge 70, impossibly thin, yet uncompromised.
2025 has been a weird and wonderful year for smartphones. It's the first time that you can buy an ultra-thin phone that won't snap like a breadstick, a normal-looking phone with a battery large enough to power a small vehicle, or a triple folding phone, even if it does happen to cost you and your entire family's kidneys. But which ones should people buy? Welcome to the heavily revamped Best Smartphones of the Year, starting with the Glow Up Award, the most improved phone from last year. And I'd say there are two, and only two obvious contenders here. So, Samsung's Galaxy Z Fold 7 feels like a massive change, simply because of how much slimmer and lighter it is than the Z Fold 6, while also bumping up pretty much all of its specs at the same time. This one generation is more than the difference in thickness between the last 4 generations of Samsung Folds put together. And then the one that, beginning of this year, I would have predicted to be the last phone to be sitting in this category, the iPhone. Not the 17 Pro, not the Pro Max, but the base iPhone 17. I distinctly remember casually strolling into the Apple event this year, being totally prepared for there to be like 2 changes max to this phone, like they usually are, only to end up scurrying out of there a couple of hours later when it finished, trying to piece together my entire page of notes. Basically, everything about the phone got better. They took the screen from easily the weakest in its price segment to probably the strongest, and even doubled the base storage of the phone without touching the price. It's enough improvements that ultimately, I'm going to give the Glow Up Award to the iPhone. There's never been such a sudden, obvious best time to upgrade. Now, onto something new this year, the Outside the Box Award, a phone that has some kind of unique trait, but that actually makes it better. So the ultra-thin phones, for example, the iPhone Air, the S25 Edge, they hit the unique part, but I would say they're worse because of it, because they die literally 30% faster than their more traditionally proportioned brethren. More on these later though. What was pretty cool though, is the rear display from the Xiaomi 17 Pro. It feels like the most fully realized second screen experience. The personalization options are vast, and you can even game on the thing. But ultimately, I would say, while it does give you tons of small, useful tools, there are just very few big features that truly change how you use your phone. The minimal phone, though, is a full Android experience, but with this black and white e-ink display that drains much less power and creates less strain on your eyes. But this doesn't win either, because batteries are getting so good this year, even without a display like this, and trying to use your apps while they're refreshing like a slideshow is, well, its own kind of strain. So for me, the smartphone that ended up impressing me the most with its uniqueness is Samsung's Galaxy Z Trifold. I went into my first hands-on thinking it would feel interesting, but gimmicky. I came out searching for what the fastest way is to transfer everything over from my iPhone when the thing releases in the UK. It is thicker and heavier when closed up than a normal foldable, but the reward of this enormous 10-inch display it has on the inside that's widescreen, so content really makes the most of it, for me, finally makes the cost and sacrifices from carrying a foldable actually worth the pain. Okay, I mentioned earlier that 2025 has been the year of normal-looking phones that just seem to have limitless endurance. But which is the best of these unkillable devices? Mind you, that doesn't mean which phone has someone just stuffed the biggest battery cell into. Optimization matters, charging speed matters, and most of all, is this still a phone that I would recommend buying outside of its killer battery? The iPhone 17 Pro Max deserves a mention here. This is the first iPhone to have a 5,000-ish milliamp-hour cell. When you combine that with Apple's optimization, it's the first ever mainstream phone that I would say has spectacular battery life, about 10% longer than Samsung's. But then you get to the supersized battery phones, which are a tier above, but there's also something that you need to look out for. That because of EU regulation, there is actually a cap on how large your battery can be before it is classed as a dangerous good. So quite a few phones that have anything over about 5,500 milliamp hours, like the Vivo X300 Pro, which has a 6,510 milliamp hour cell, they actually ship a tweaked version of their phone with a smaller battery to European countries. So if you buy the phone here, you would only get 5,440, which is why this isn't winning the award. The clever thing, though, that some companies have done is 2 cells, 2 separate batteries that each sit under the EU cap, but combine to give you more. It is a little bit less space efficient because you now have to have 2 separate battery casings, but can't complain too hard. It gets you the capacity you want. And it makes your charging faster too, because it allows the phone to split the load of current and heat between the 2 cells. All of which to say, the real battery champs of 2025 are the phones that have this dual cell design. So that is the Xiaomi 17 Pro Max with a ridiculous 7,500 milliamp hour overall capacity and 100-watt charging. The only caveat is this whole rear second display is a little bit of a contradiction if you're purely optimizing for endurance. Even Realme's flagship phone, the GT8 Pro, has a dual cell, 7,000 milliamp hour capacity with 120-watt charging. You gotta love this year of phones. And then the OnePlus 15 takes that 120-watt charging, pairing it with an even higher capacity of 7,300 milliamp hours. This also might just be the most comfortable that a phone has ever felt in the hands. It's like a baby's bottom. I don't know if that comes across right, to be honest. I'm just not a fan of the camera downgrades that have snuck in here. Compared to the previous OnePlus flagship, every one of these rear camera sensors is smaller, which I'm going to explain why in a bit, but it doesn't bring joy. So, the phone that I think wins the Unkillable Battery Award, the phone I would choose to use if battery was the priority, is the Oppo Find X9 Pro. 7,500 milliamp hours, basically as big as you can get. A pretty similar spec sheet and design to the OnePlus 15, but instead of a camera downgrade, this is up. This is way up. The only catch is 80-watt charging instead of the 100 plus that some of these phones can do. But then when you think about the fact that the iPhone is capped at 40 and the Samsung is capped at 45, it doesn't feel like so much of a problem. Now, where I think this gets particularly interesting is when we talk about the Filmmaker's Choice Award. Exactly what it sounds like, it's the best camera, but with one clarification. This award also factors in the camera experience. Does the battery let you shoot for a long time? Is the screen bright enough so you can see outdoors? Is the camera app really polished and intuitive to use? So instead of thinking this is just best photos, best videos, think of it as which phone would I actually want to use to take those photos and videos. So let's get one thing out the way. It is not the iPhone 17 Pro. It is not the Samsung Galaxy S25 Ultra. We're at a point in the smartphone market where to actually take these cameras to the next level, one must pay the toll. Did it work? Is it nice and scary? You'd have to make your camera sensors wider, and then for those wider sensors to work, you'd also have to make them deeper, potentially making your phone top heavy, cutting into the battery, or God forbid, turning your design into this. So for companies like Apple and Samsung, who are not trying to sell millions, they're trying to sell tens of millions of their flagships, they are going to be very resistant to making changes like this that might feel like a compromise for 90% of people for the benefit of 10%. All of which to say, these guys can let themselves out. Pretty similar story for the Google Pixel 10 Pro. It has the highest number of intelligent camera features, but for someone who really knows what they're doing, you will be able to get more out of phones that have better camera hardware. And it's not quite the Oppo Find X9 Pro, although this is extremely close. It actually has almost identical camera hardware to the actual winner, which is the Vivo X300 Pro. A phone that I would actually say is 2 generations ahead of the already extremely capable mainstream flagships. The thing has a ridiculously bright outdoor display, peaking at 4,500 nits. Its battery, while it's not the very top, is still well enough for a full day of shooting, and the camera itself is special. If you didn't know, Vivo, Oppo, and OnePlus are all owned by the same parent company, BBK. That's why there's so many parallels between their phones. But what's really interesting is this year, it feels like they're really trying to separate who each one is for. I think they've decided that OnePlus is pure performance. That's why the OnePlus 15 gets the fastest chip and huge battery, but scaled back cameras. And they've even scrapped the OnePlus Hasselblad camera partnership that's been going on for years now. It feels like Oppo is the halfway house. It's got most of the performance of OnePlus and most of the camera of Vivo because they want this to be the mainstream all-rounder flagship, and then they want the camera enthusiasts to go to Vivo with its slightly scaled back battery but the best camera sensors you can find, paired with the most advanced, smoothest damn camera software to ever grace an Android phone. And this specialization is kind of nice because it means that if you are someone who is going to take photos and really pore over the details and appreciate the perfect skin tones, the Vivo is worth every cent. Not to mention its 200 megapixel telephoto camera, which is the closest I have ever been to owning spy equipment. Well, second closest. Last few holidays I've been on, I actually left my camera at home just because I knew I had this X300 in my backpack, and I way prefer shooting with a phone if I can. That's actually the main reason we work with Taurus, and why you'll always find me using one of their O-stand cases on my iPhone. It lets you shoot from really unique angles by being able to hook this stand around things. It gives you the stability of a tripod anywhere. So whenever I stumble across a really cool scene that I'm probably never coming back to, I can just plop it down and take a time lapse or a really high quality starry sky shot like this one. And it's got a strong magnet baked in, so you can snap it onto a surface and film yourself with your hands completely free. You can get these for iPhone, Samsung, Pixel, and it's all topped off with maybe the coolest new finishes ever, like this one, Christmas tree.
What if thin meant more durable? What if thin meant days of power? What if thin meant more versatile cameras? Motorola Edge 70, impossibly thin, yet uncompromised.
Hello, Moto.
Okay, enough about cameras. Which phone gives you the single most impressive sustained gaming experience, earning the Pocket Console Award? And I want to stress here, the vast majority of people, even if you're playing big, intensive games, don't need a gaming phone. I'd actually say the best gaming phone for most people is just the iPhone 17 Pro Max. Apple just improved the thermal performance, the battery's amazing, the speakers are top-notch, and games on iPhone are generally a little more optimized than Android. However, there will always be some people who decide that they want to go all in. And if you do, you can eke out that little bit of extra performance with the Red Magic 11 Pro. And this is a pretty sick phone because it's more than just the latest chip, most RAM, and a vapor chamber to keep it cool. This is the first smartphone to also introduce active liquid cooling. So vapor chambers, which you've now started seeing even in mainstream flagships, are a passive form of cooling. Think of them like a metal block with some water inside. And that water is just continuously evaporating and condensing by itself as the phone heats up, which just helps to speed up the process of getting that heat out. This phone has an actual pump that is actively pushing coolant around the phone. It's more like the way that a top-end PC's cooling system would work. And when you combine that with the two other cooling systems also at play, well, you can play Call of Duty, or Call of Duty, in the slickest way possible. So I am crowning this the best phone for gaming, and it does that while also starting at a very reasonable $729. But then again, you can absolutely see where they've cut some corners when you start testing the cameras. This is why I'm a little hesitant to recommend gaming phone in the current meta. Also, if you're wondering, there was no Asus ROG phone this year. Looks like it's been delayed to 2026. And now, for possibly the most opposite vibe imaginable, introducing the Grandma's Choice Award, the most hassle-free, it just works well device for someone who's not as tech savvy. There's a bit of a niche, purpose-built option in the Chatsy phone that we tested in our Instagram ads video. It's very interesting. It's got this entirely new user interface built around older people being able to clearly understand it, which is absolutely a factor here. And the customer service is insanely helpful. But the hardware is extremely basic considering its near $400 price. Samsung is also a pretty safe recommendation. Their mid-ranges this year, like the A56, they've got these spacious, really readable screens, they've got big batteries, they're durable with good quality glass on the front and back and an IP rating. Plus, Samsung has Easy Mode, which is essentially built for parents and grandparents. But I wouldn't call Samsung the winner. I would say, by a fairly healthy margin, it's actually the Google Pixel 9a. It is a smaller phone, but I just think there is something beautifully simple about Google software that is great for this category. The fact that it's filled with really helpful tutorials, how it speaks to you at a very non-tech expert level, and also the fact that there is no bloatware, which also means none of that duplication of apps that you see on Samsung. So no one's getting confused here about when to use Google Photos and when to use Samsung's Gallery. Google has their own version of Easy Mode called Simple View, and again, it's extremely effective. All finished off with this camera. While I don't think the camera on this Pixel, or really any Pixel, has the highest ceiling, what it does have is one of the highest floors. It makes it very easy to not take a bad photo, and should you still end up doing so, it's got arguably the best toolkit to fix your images afterwards. Now, the other area where Google Pixel also seems to shine is the one-handed hero category. Compact phones that make you question just how did they squeeze all of that in? Because there are a ton of premium compact phones. You've got Samsung, you've got Apple, you've got Xiaomi, you've even got all the flip phones. It feels pretty overwhelming. But then you look closer and you realize that there's actually a very large range in terms of how much different phones give up to be compact. Like Samsung's Galaxy S25, for example. This is a safe, completely fine phone, but it is worse in every conceivable way compared to the company's bigger S25 Ultra. I'd say a little bit less so for the iPhone, but the smaller iPhone 17 does miss out on quite a bit of the battery life that you get on the bigger Pro Max. This is not the case for Google. I mean, while I don't think the plus-size Pixel 10 Pro XL is like the best big phone, I would say the smaller 10 Pro is a cracking compact phone because it has just bottled the entire experience of the XL with almost zero compromise, including the battery life. But there is one phone that I think embodies the one-handed hero concept even more so than Google, and that is the Xiaomi 17 Pro. This not particularly large device retains every single one of the bells and whistles from the bigger Pro Max, including, by the way, this whole second screen. And then, unlike the Pixel 10 Pro, which has a weaker than average Google Tensor chip, Xiaomi has a well above average next generation Snapdragon chip. And unlike the Google, which I'd say already has great battery life, this compact phone, I would go as far as to say, has extraordinary battery life. If you are specifically looking for one of the flippers, by the way, then I personally rate Samsung Z Flip just a tiny bit higher than Motorola's Razr 60 Ultra, but they are both great. The Moto's got a bigger battery and slightly better spec cameras, but Samsung's thinner, it's lighter, and I think Samsung's tuning lets it still take better photos than
Slim like a whisper, sharp in the hand, never unplanned.
Introducing Motorola Edge 70, impossibly thin, yet uncompromised.
Motos. Right, it's time for the one that I take no pleasure in awarding. Who am I kidding? It's like my favorite category. The Why Does This Exist award for the most disappointing or confusing launch this year. And there's only one runner-up, the Nothing Phone 3. I would say Nothing's budget and mid-range phones have been, well, nothing short of category-defining devices. Their flagship, though, which they waited 3 full years before making, was just very similar, but with a spec bump. And then to make it feel like a distinct step up, they added this weird dotty rear screen that actually just felt less cool than the Matrix lights from their previous, more affordable phones. I still don't think it's a bad phone, it's just a slightly disappointing one, especially considering its $800 launch price. As for who wins then, or loses, you know what, no, it's an achievement. Let's go with wins. I want to hand it to both of these phones, the two-dimensional twins of 2025, Samsung's S25 Edge and Apple's iPhone Air. And it's not because I think these things are unusable, or because I think they're not a feat of engineering, because they are. It's still impressive to me, and I've had this S25 Edge for 6 months now. It's that I think both of these devices are absolutely beautiful traps. This shiny, alluring new form factor that is going to sway a lot of people in the short term when they're making that buying decision. But then long term, when you stop noticing that form factor and the battery degradation starts to set in, I think most of those users will start to become worse off because of it. They'll start to wonder, why are my photos so grainy when I try and zoom in? Why am I having to use power saving mode every day? Why is my phone starting to feel choppy after 20 minutes of gaming? Which are not things that you want to be wondering when you have still forked out $1,000 to get one of these. So what if you wanted to specifically protect your wallet? If you wanted to spend no more than $300 but get the most smartphone possible? Well, as with every other year before, Poco is waiting for us with open arms. I gotta say, their X7 Pro, excuse my extremely bright Avengers edition over here, this thing is the most appealing that a Poco has ever been. The fact that $300 now gets you a phone that can take great photos on its 50 megapixel main camera, is extremely readable in any lighting with 3,200 nits of peak brightness, and lasts for at least a day and a half on a charge with its 6,000 mAh battery is so cool. So this is the clear spec maxing option. When you factor in though the overall phone experience, I would side very slightly with the CMF Phone 2 Pro by Nothing. You are getting a bit less hardware, but it's cheaper at $250, and it's got that Nothing level of polish that makes it feel a little more expensive than its pared back stats might suggest. The software's really optimized, the bloatware's minimal, and the phone takes surprisingly good photos with 2 50 megapixel cameras on the back. Oh yeah, plus the thing's modular with the ability to screw in a stand or camera lenses, or just swap out the backplate entirely. So there are a couple of other options from Nothing floating around this $300 price point, but frankly, the CMF phone is the best value option. The Overachiever award, though, goes to the mid-range phone that gives you far more than you expected. Enough to take it into flagship territory and even beyond in some ways. And the phone that wins this award in 2025 is probably the most immediately impressed I've been in years. So this is yet another one of those categories where I don't think the Apples and Samsungs take it. Those are companies whose entire business model revolves around protecting their flagships and who don't particularly fight to over-deliver on value. And even these phones, the very well-rounded Xiaomi 15T and 15T Pro, which now run the slicker, more stylish HyperOS 3 Android skin, the competition is heated enough this year that even they can't burn through. The two phones that truly do punch above their weight are, one, the Realme GT8 Pro that I mentioned earlier. This is by far the most stacked smartphone to ever come out of this company. Like, think of a current cutting-edge smartphone spec. This thing has it. All for around $750, and it comes with a screwdriver so that you can swap the shape of your camera module into a rectangle. It's probably the strangest extra on a phone, so laser focused on price to performance. But even with its screwdriver, it's not the winner. I am giving that award to the Poco F8 Ultra. A phone that has not just surpassed my expectations, it has walked in, it has slapped them across the face, and rewritten them from scratch. Because spec-wise, this is very close to the extreme Realme phone, but it's a little bit more affordable. It's $679. It actually looks really smart and unique with this denim finish that has actually immediately become one of my favorite smartphone finishes because it's so grippy, it doesn't scratch at all, and it shows no fingerprints. And then the speakers here are incredible. The phone's a partnership with Bose, and so what they've done is built an entire extra subwoofer on the back, which is all I've been dreaming of from a phone for a long time. Now, I will say, temper your expectations. This doesn't suddenly turn your smartphone into giant Bluetooth speaker levels of depth or richness, but it's enough to make even one of the best sounding phones, the iPhone 17 Pro Max, sound a little compressed side by side. And I think that's quite the achievement, which leaves us with just one award to give. For the person who wants to pay flagship money and just wants the very best. So the contenders are Samsung S25 Ultra, of course, for just being so well-rounded. Everything about it is at least good. It's just that we're at a stage now where the chip and battery inside are fairly outclassed. iPhone 17 Pro and Pro Max. I love the focus on battery, and I would actually say the improved signal has been one of the most impactful upgrades for me in the last 5 years. But it's also not this, because Siri, and to be honest, iOS in general, just feels like it's lagging behind. Xiaomi's 17 Pro Max is also fascinating. It's just for me, I wouldn't deprioritize the cameras like this to prioritize a second display. I absolutely love the Vivo X300 Pro, as you've seen, and it is so close to perfect. It's just slightly lacking in the battery department to be called winner, which means overall smartphone of the year is going to its very similar cousin that isn't, the Oppo Find X9 Pro. I think that's the closest we've ever been to a flawless phone. The only flaw being that you might struggle to get one, depending on where you live. They even pre-installed the screen protector. Just
Finally, an ultra thin phone that makes you go, wow.
Ultra slim at just 5.9 mm and comes with not just one, but 350 megapixel cameras that take some stunning photos, stunning videos.
With no compromise on durability, metal frame, IP68 and 69 underwater protection. Truly a thin phone done right.
Motorola Edge 70.
Hello, Moto.
I've just bought every single Nintendo home console ever. We've got a TV from the time of each one's release, and even the main Super Mario game for every single one. So let's see how much better the gaming experience has become. Nintendo's first home console, the NES, couldn't have come at a worse time in the West. The company had had huge success with their arcade machines, but when it finally came to entering the living room in the early 1980s, the entire video game market just so happened to be experiencing what's still known as the Great Video Game Crash of 1983. Put simply, everyone was making games consoles. There had become far too many to choose from, and every single one had their own separate, confusing selection of rushed, poor quality games. The entire reputation of a video game console was the worst that it had ever been, to the point where critics were even saying that gaming is a fad and that the entire concept would actually die out in a couple of years. But this didn't put Nintendo off, and in fact they did something very clever to try and spin it to their advantage. They created a games console that looked nothing like a games console, and they called it the Nintendo Entertainment System to avoid the stigma that came with the term video game. They even bundled 2 controllers in the box to make it more of a family living room item than something just for the solo gamer. This was a calculated move. Man, this entire package is so unbelievably old that it almost just looks alien, doesn't it? The controllers, the types of cables and the adapters you find here, none of it even resembles what we use today. I can't believe I'm about to switch on a console from 1985. And this TV, I've never seen anything like it. And apparently it turns on by... No. Let's try that again. Now we turn the console on. Wait. What? The game is booted up the second you turn the power button on. And then you've actually got physical dials to be able to adjust the picture profile on the screen. This entire thing is just so satisfying. This is gonna sound ridiculous, but bear with me here. Because with a 1.7 megahertz processor, a whole 2 kilobytes of RAM, and a maximum resolution of 240p, the NES was actually spec'd like a next-gen machine when compared to the Atari 2600s that people were playing before them. And as a huge fan of just video games in general, the craziest part of this for me is that this console is the console where Nintendo launched the first ever Zelda game, and more importantly, the first ever Mario game. Let's plug the Player One controller in. Oh my gosh. This feels like such a moment in gaming history. Like, imagine if you could have taken the small group of developers that made this and showed them what Mario would actually become today. You can hear that same jump sound even in today's games. And it's crazy that the entire game basically works with one face button. The text itself is kind of hard to read because of how low the resolution is, but the game is very playable even today. Regardless, this little red plumber was an instant hit. And when you combine Mario with the console's beautiful clean graphics, its branding as a must-have toy instead of a games console, as well as its rock-bottom price of $250 in today's money, you can probably see how it became the most popular console in history, selling 61.9 million units, which was enough that Nintendo had arguably saved the entire video game industry. That by the time they decided to release the NES's successor, they didn't even have to worry about a dying market anymore. And what a successor it was. The Super Nintendo Entertainment System, released about 5 years later at a much higher price tag of $450 in today's money, was basically an NES with every aspect dialed up to the max. For starters, the controller was probably the single most important controller ever made, bringing in a smoother, more hand-friendly design, 2 extra face buttons, X and Y, that set the standard for how all future controllers would be made, and also shoulder buttons. All controllers up until this point relied almost entirely on your thumbs as the only input. But this controller is what made gamers realize that actually every single finger could be an input. And this would allow for games with a new tier of complexity. Whether it be drifting in Super Mario Kart or aiming your arm cannon diagonally in Super Metroid. Yeah, Nintendo loved using the word super. It was basically their way of saying next gen. There's a similarly enormous set of cables and adapters to last time, and then the SNES itself, which is actually lighter than I expected for something that's an absolute beast in performance. And I'm not exaggerating when I use the term beast. The way to calculate graphics power is a little complex for these early consoles, but just to give you an idea of how much more capable it could be, the SNES came with 64 times the amount of RAM versus their last machine. What is it with the pull tabs on these old TVs? I love the clickiness of everything. It's also so crazy that this is what the games used to look like. And then to turn the console on, there is a switch. A Nintendo Switch.
Slim like a whisper, sharp in the hand, never unplanned.
Introducing Motorola Edge 70, impossibly thin, yet uncompromised.
Nintendo presents. Ah, that's so much better. Music in this video is giving me chills. And it's also noticeably higher resolution music than the last console. In a way, the SNES was the pinnacle of 2D gaming, just before the 3D era. With this much power, developers could basically make any 2D game they wanted to. So if we compare Super Mario World on the SNES versus Super Mario Bros. On the NES, the background feels so much more alive, with multiple layers moving at different speeds as you walk to simulate things being closer and further away from you. It's also a shocking amount sharper. Like, text on this is barely readable. This one has like no problems at all. And objects also have proper lighting and shadows for the first time ever. Now that that has become my benchmark, I can almost feel the wonder that people must have felt when stepping into this game for the first time. Why am I excited by the fact that Mario has a new spinny jump? The SNES didn't quite trounce the sales figures of the original NES, but for a console released only a few years later, the fact that it still sold 49 million units is nothing to be scoffed at. But with consoles like Sony's first PlayStation leading the charge into 3D gaming very shortly after, Nintendo had to find a way to keep up. Enter the Nintendo 64, named after its new 64-bit chip that could now process data in larger chunks at a time, making it perfect for 3D. Man, this box is so wacky. Love it. And the controller, equally so. But as much as it does look like something Batman might throw at a villain's face, this was just as big of a deal as the SNES controller, thanks to the invention of the analog stick by a Nintendo employee. You're going to start to notice a theme in this video, that even more so than the machines themselves, the key to Nintendo's console success is all about controller innovation. And then we've got the console, which is almost as weird looking as the controller. Now here's the thing, the Nintendo 64 had all the ingredients of a slam dunk console. Firstly, as you might have guessed by how it's literally named after its new processor, this was the most powerful console in the world. The fact that we had a 64-bit processor in a machine that was literally $300 in today's money, this was almost science fiction. And it made this thing approximately 30 times more powerful than the SNES. Or, what's even harder to grasp, 1,920 times more powerful than the NES. Why is there a button here? That makes no sense. But the analog stick was a game changer. The analog stick made the Nintendo 64 the most natural way to traverse 3D environments. Plus, the biggest thing that separated Nintendo from other console titans like Sony and Microsoft was the fact that they weren't just console designers, they were game developers. So they never just made the box and then hoped lots of great games were made for it. They made the box and the main games that you'd want to buy with it. I'm just now realizing this has 4 controller ports compared to 2 on every past console. The N64 was home to truly legendary games like Zelda Ocarina of Time, GoldenEye, and Super Mario 64. You bet we're gonna test it. Thankfully a TV I understand. I love these switches. The other upside is that your pet can no longer turn your gaming console off. You can actually see it take a minute to get to the right level of brightness. Oh my gosh. I can't even begin to describe the difference here. Mario 64 might just be the most influential video game ever. You can see how Mario 64 was the proof of concept for how future 3D worlds would work. How you'd be able to move within them, how the camera would follow you, and how you'd be able to interact with objects inside of it. Remember, this is all new. You could argue that SNES games have actually aged better, because 2D games that look like that are still a thing now, whereas 3D games that look like this are not. But putting myself in the shoes of someone whose best gaming experience so far was that, and handing them this, I would have paid to see their reactions. So why didn't it do better? Even with all of this going for it, the N64 only managed to sell 32.9 million units in its lifetime, which almost makes it seem like Nintendo is trying so hard for nothing. And to put it simply, it's because they now had a major competitor in the form of PlayStation. The PS1, while not as capable on paper, beat Nintendo to market with a 3D-capable machine by a full 2 years, which was enough of a lead that all the pioneers who really wanted a 3D console, they already had one. This was no doubt extremely frustrating for Nintendo. So when it came time for their follow-up console, the GameCube, they made sure that they released closer to the next PlayStation, the PS2, and they made sure that they used a similar disc-based format, and they made sure that when it came to power, they beat it. And that with the machine itself, they outdid them completely. This is a very meaty console. Everything in this box is just much denser than before. The wiring, the controller that looks like it's from another planet, and of course the machine itself. It genuinely gives off the vibe of a mini supercomputer, apart from the cute little handle on top that also makes it look like a lunchbox. But the console does send a very clear message. You want to play 3D